Listening to Mystic Lounge with Alan B. Smith. Rebroadcast on the UNX Network. Thursdays at 11 p.m. Pacific. Fridays at 2 a.m. Eastern.
However you are and whenever you are, welcome, good souls, to Mystic Lounge. I'm Alan B. Smith. Welcome again to another transversing of the unknown and mysterious. However, tonight's guest will be rediscovering the mysterious rumors, legends, folklore, that indeed there were visitors to the Americas pre-Columbus. This is hotly debated among many historians, but at least now I would say we're having a debate. Previously, maybe 10 plus years ago, it was really a taboo topic altogether. And my guest, James Martin, is the co-author of UNCHARTED, A Rediscovered History of Voyages to Americas Before Columbus. So this is a two-part kind of series of history and ancient history. Last week, we looked at mysterious locations throughout the U.S. and the Hudson Valley here in the Northeast. And now we're going even further back in time. So I have so many questions for our guests. I'm very excited. Thank you all for joining. If you missed this live stream, you can always catch it on the UNX network at 2 a.m. Eastern time on Fridays and 11 p.m. Pacific time Thursday nights. And of course, you can get the podcast wherever you listen to your podcast. And if you enjoy the show, please leave a review, a rating. All of that really helps to keep the podcast growing. So I appreciate all that feedback and support. Other really cool news. One of my previous guests, Jesse Peak, who is a fellow MUFON field investigator, he is somewhat close to me, about a couple of hours away in Philadelphia. And he is starting the first time ever Philadelphia Exposure UFO Con. And it's taking place May 20th. And the UNX Network is the official sponsor for that as well. The speakers are great. The three, just to list off here, is Frank Chili, Eric Mintel, and Bill Burns. Excuse me. I'll put the link in the show description so you can check that out if you're interested. We're getting a lot of activity in regards to attention towards the UFO phenomena, and you can really see that popping up, even around here in the lower New York State area. Pine Bush has been exploding and growing so fast every year. We now have conferences in New York, which was never happened before because it was just so expensive. And we're getting all these, novel organic conferences popping up all over the country, which means that there is an insatiable desire to talk about this among the general public. Now, tonight's guest, maybe we can, touch on that a little bit because he does have a little bit of a paranormal background as well. But we'll try to keep as much as we can to this fascinating history. So my guest is James Martin. He is the co-author of UNCHARTED, A Rediscovered History of Voyages to the Americas Before Columbus. He is a British historian, economist, and lecturer with experience in the field of paranormal investigation. James has been a member of an investigator for the Worsley Paranormal Group since its founding in 2003. UNCHARTED covers a range of cultures who seemingly have been visiting the Americas long before Columbus. In compelling detail, his book presents stories of visiting distant lands that abound for many cultures, such as the Egyptian, Greeks, Celts, and one large Chinese group that likely settled in the Americas in 100 BC. Simply put, the history of the discovery of North America is all wrong. James, welcome to Mystic Lounge. How are you?
Hi, good to be with you. A little bit tired this morning, but good evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you all are.
Yes, cheers to you, brother, fellow enthusiast of coffee, and that's a big cup of coffee. So I'm glad that you're coffeeed up for us tonight because I know it's really late there in France. I appreciate that. tell us a little bit about, for you, what was the first story you heard that compelled an interest, a curiosity about whether there were pre-Columbus um, perhaps settlers?
Well, for me, it was actually doing my master's, which was in something called industrial relations, history, economics, politics.
Mm-hmm.
And I was looking at how the Norse, or the Vikings, if you want, but we'll call them the Norse for now, were trading over the North Atlantic, so
Mm-hmm.
in Greenland. And I remember reading a book by Professor Graham Davis, which was called Vikings in America,
Mm-hmm.
and a heavily sourced book about what had happened to the colonists from Greenland around 1350. There's this huge climate event, everything gets colder, and where did they end up? From there, not really having heard too much about pre-Columbian discoveries, then it was like my eyes, like this veil had been lifted, um, because all of a sudden there's evidence, and really obvious evidence as well.
That experience is something that is akin to even a paranormal experience, a UFO experience, right? It's like suddenly there's a realization that there's something that you were simply not informed of, was not part of our regular everyday acceptance of what, reality is, the makeup of that. And history is reality. I mean, we identify based on what we know in our history. I mean, it's our stories. It's the story that we're writing is based on these past chapters. In the writing of this book, we should mention that your co-author was Tim Wallace Murphy. Can you tell us a little bit about Tim, who has since passed?
Yeah, sure. Well, firstly, Tim would have described himself as a mad Irishman with 2 feet firmly stuck in midair. I am sure the way that he would like to have been described. Tim was very much like a father figure for me, and our my involvement with this book came from about 2018, something like this. Tim had started to write a book in 2014, or a manuscript, and had stalled for other projects. And we were having, well, oddly enough, a coffee, and I introduced a there's the book. Our mutual interest in this topic sort of led to me editing and then adding, and the one particular line where I said, Tim, called him on Skype, so Tim, I need to, it's not just edits, I said, but sort of mistranslation of one of the Norse runes, the Kensington runestone, it's not quite accurate. Are you okay if I just add some context? You can add what you want to, dear boy. I can always delete it afterwards. So that was that.
Was that in the forward of the book? I feel like you mentioned something. Okay, yeah,
it was, yeah.
I love that, because you need a little bit of I think a spritish or punkish attitude when you're entering, these categories. Because if you don't have that little bit of an edge, a little bit of willing to take a bite of something that could be a bitter pill, then you would never be able to discover what or what you think you've discovered. So, what is the oldest period that you think that humans came from, either West Asia, Eurasia, or Europe?
I think my usual shout out, which is obviously the people already living in the Americas were the first to discover it. If we sort of move aside from that.
Well, let's talk about that. Yeah, because when I say what I just said, we all think the Bering Strait, and that there's some peoples from Asia that had crossed over the Bering Strait, and those were the first peoples of of the Americas. Were there people before them?
I think there's certainly some suggestion that it's not just the Bering Strait, that actually it is possible to have essentially island hugged across the northern polar ice cap, which would have been about 4 miles in height and covered really everything from central France right the way over to New England. It would have been possible to have traversed there. I think the difficulty that we've got, other than with the exception of just the DNA side of things, is when we are looking back at our history, we look to not just the DNA, but also any written accounts. And I think if we were to define that, the written accounts, for me, we're really looking at either the ancient Chinese, but I would be much more confident with the ancient Egyptians. I would suggest somewhere in the region of 4,000 to 3,000 BC.
3,000 BC.
Yeah.
That's crazy far back. But of course, if we think in terms of the first peoples of America, that would be 3,000 BC. I mean, certainly there's evidence of a Clovis culture and other cultures that predated that. So the problem, it seems, is that archaeologists are coming around a little bit to the idea that there could possibly have been some other culture, like the Clovis culture, for instance, because I'm unaware of any other to compare it to, that might have been true, that there might have been people, some are reluctant to accept that, others are certainly willing to entertain it. The real kink is pre-Columbus, the time between the settlement of the first peoples and Columbus. So you think that the Egyptians came over? What evidence do we have to support that?
I think that's, I'll just qualify. I think in terms of the written record, we've got the Egyptians, but there is, just before we come on to that, there is a really interesting part of, I suppose, Michigan, the northern United States history, and this is, of course, the mining that was going on for copper. Copper and tin are required to produce bronze. And in Europe during the Bronze Age, there was essentially an arms race going on, and there's not sufficient quantities of copper nor tin in Europe that would have been available to account for the amount of bronze. Whereas if you look in northern Michigan, around the Great Lakes, there are entire scars on the surface where vast quantities of alluvial copper have been extracted. Several hundreds of thousands of tons of copper. We know that the native population didn't have a metallurgical need for any of that, or if they did, that has not been discovered, that has not been found. So, and there are also some oral traditions too from native cultures who suggest that the white man, were mining for this copper. Now, tin also found in South America. So, I think if we were to look at that, but who those people were, we're not too sure.
Is there no evidence of the Native Americans using copper that would have come from these mines?
Again, yes, there is. There is evidence that the Native Americans used some copper, but where is it all? Because you're sort of looking at around about 2% of the amount of copper mined has been used. Or has been found, and you can tell with metallurgy, it's interesting because what you can do is check for the purities, and it's within the purities you can roughly tell where something's from. when we're finding copper, bronze, even tin in Europe that's not from Europe, the key question is how did it end up there? Um, and my suggestion would be during the Bronze Age, during this this arms race between various groups. My suggestion is actually it came from the what we would call today the United States or Southern Canada. To bring us on to the ancient Egyptians, though. Where do we begin? We can talk about corn if you'd like. I don't know about you, but and I have quite a few American friends, and I get shouted at all of the time for this. But do you like eating corn?
Of course.
Now, I have been scolded because the way I like eating corn is I like to boil mine.
Yeah.
People have said, no, it's got to go in the barbecue. And I get into lots of trouble.
Mm.
I quite like mine boiled.
Dear fellow Americans, grilled is not the only way. Yeah. Although, if you get it grilled and it's nice and charred, that is a delicious way to go. It's not the only way, though. We like to boil our corn and smother it in salt, and we just really enjoy that. A good sweet, because we have great farms nearby. The fresh sweet corn, it's amazing. But yeah, you can do that, or you can grill it and sprinkle a little cheese on there.
Just salted butter for me. There we go.
If you have smoked chili powder, by the way, that's a nice little touch too.
Now it's 3 a.m, Cave. I shouldn't be this hungry already. Now, I don't know if you've noticed when you're cooking or when you're boiling corn cobs, they don't float. They sink straight to the bottom of the pan.
Yep.
One of the important reasons to use a little bit of salt or keep the pan moving so that the corn cob doesn't stick to the bottom of the pan.
Right.
Okay. Now, I'm not just talking about corn because I feel like it. Although we could, I'm sure we've got there'd be a great show on recipes and all of this that we could branch off. Who knows? But what I'm saying here is we can rule out corn cobs floating over the surface of the Atlantic. I just want us to get that into our minds. With corn cobs, there are two things. They would be as soon as they hit the ocean, they would hit the surf. They hit the bottom of the ocean. And secondly, even if they did manage to find their way into Europe, the salt water would have destroyed any ability for those cobs to germinate. Now, why am I mentioning any of this? Quite simply, because there's a biblical reference to Indian corn and all of this. The biblical references to corn feeding the famished Jewish population in the Middle East. And specifically, we find in Egypt over 1,000 depictions in funerary sites within temple structures of the American corn cob, or maize, as we perhaps should be calling it. Now, there are different varieties of corn cob, but none of them look as distinctive as the American maize plant, where we see these big haunches, these big leaves, and usually when you see corn carved, it looks like like jewelry. It looks quite ornate. Where on earth did that corn come from? We see it from ancient Egypt. For those who perhaps might have been to Rosslyn Chapel in just outside of Edinburgh in Scotland, that built around the 1420s, there are depictions of corn cob. Now, where on earth did that come from?
Well, just to play the skeptic, right before we keep going, I remember there was a building. I forget what the building was, but there was a carving on it of an astronaut on one of the cornerstones, and people are like, "Oh, proof of an astronaut," and it just turned out that someone had later adorned that building with a carving of an astronaut. Not it wasn't inherent to the original structure. So what would be your rebuttal to that if that were the argument, to say, oh, someone just came along and added these hieroglyphs or petroglyphs?
I think where we're dealing with, and yeah, you're absolutely right. I know that when I've been in the field digging in terms of archaeology, not just randomly digging in places.
What you're digging so you can set up your corn maze and
that's it. Yeah, plant that there.
Yeah.
No, if things were found in isolation, so there was
Mm-hmm.
some discussion of a carving depicting a tank from ancient Egypt. Well, all right, fine, but for such a machine, you'd expect to see a few more.
Mm-hmm.
If it was an isolated incident, then yes, okay. When you're dealing with hundreds of carvings, then we need to try and establish what it is. And if the evidence of Egyptians in the traveling over to the Americas was just based on corn cobs, you wouldn't be reading it in the chapter. It's not just the corn cob.
Mm-hmm.
What we have is depictions of a very fertile place, the land of Punt, as the Egyptians would have referred to. Now, academics prefer to say that Punt is in Somalia today, sort of on the Horn of Africa.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the references to Punt, and there were several journeys made by several different pharaohs, or at least commissioned by those pharaohs.
Mm-hmm.
The depiction of Punt is that it was a place of bounty. It was full of life, a sort of heaven on earth. Now, the climate was most certainly different, but I don't think we're necessarily dealing with Somalia. And
go ahead. Yeah.
And so we've not just got that, and the reason I mention Land of Punt is because of the size of the vessels that the Egyptians are sailing in. These are much larger than the Santa Maria of Columbus. Much bigger. They are huge trading, seagoing vessels.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, I mean, the bit of interest in the Egyptian side of things actually comes from, and just a bit of a heads up for everyone. I know it's late on, but I do need to talk about tobacco and drugs, in which I'm not referring to ancient Egyptians as having a wild party, although they might have. We've got a slight problem in history with trying to establish why a variety of mummies that have been relocated from Egypt into museums across Europe, indeed the United States, but why it is that they appear to be contaminated. So I'll just give you a bit of context for this. In 1976, Dr. Michelle Lescott, who was at the Museum of I think it was Natural History in Paris, had received a sample from the mummified remains of Ramses the Great, Ramses II. And using a scanning electron microscope, she had discovered that there was a large amount of tobacco clinging to the fibers within bandages. Now, if I was in her shoes, I would be thinking, is this contamination from the Victorians? The Victorians liked smoking tobacco and liked doing other things as well. So, again, one of these things in isolation, we could be looking at contamination. You also then want to get the as many samples as possible. So there was then another toxicologist. So her name was Svetlana Balabanova.
Mm-hmm.
And she then seeks to verify Dr. Lescott's findings. She asks for a number of samples, or she calls out across a number of museums and universities across Europe to really test their mummies. So the Manchester Museum, for example, in northwestern England, is called. They test, I think there's 5 mummies. 3 of them confirmed positive for tobacco. Now, tobacco is only found, or the types of tobacco that was identified, was only found in the United States. Even the plants that we have in Europe, the tobacco plants in Europe, not many, this is post-Columbus, wouldn't align. So the tobacco must have come from the Americas. But here is where, again, in 1992, Balabanova is undertaking some more tests, and what she finds is it's not just tobacco that's found within the mummies, but in fact evidence of cocaine.
And when you say in the bloodstream, in the blood vessels, or
well, these are within, and this is where it gets a little bit more interesting. These are within the intestinal tracts of the mummies. When you're trying to establish how it is, what was the cause of death, essentially, it's a very delicate, but it is possible that they were contaminated. But so many mummies, when we're talking just under 100 mummies with cocaine and tobacco within them.
When you say cocaine, I mean, my understanding is that in South America, that it wasn't cocaine per se. It's like cocoa paste, or it wasn't the powder substance like that we have.
No, it's
today,
not
right? Yeah,
it's not the stuff that you find some people taking today.
Right.
It is the correct term for it. I mean, when I say tobacco, perhaps we could extend that to nicotine, which can be found in other plants too.
Right.
But yes, really, from the cocoa plant. Now, if we put all of this in the mix, so we look at the corn cobs, we look at depictions of punt, that may or may not be the Americas. It could very well be Somalia. But then when we look at the level of tobacco, of narcotics, essentially, that are found within Egyptian mummies, the key question is that's a hell of a lot of contamination to be going on, found within the intestinal tract. Or perhaps are we realistically dealing with some further evidence that the Egyptians were trading? Certainly their vessels would have been capable.
Is there a way to excavate new mummies, right? And are they doing this in a way that isolates them better to avoid contamination, so that future tests, should it be found, we can say, okay, there's just no doubt?
Yes. Today, so whenever a mummy is found, the first thing that we do today is to essentially isolate the scene. It's the same with any dig. So when I've dug on Hadrian's Wall, for example, if you locate something, it's exceptionally important not to allow atmospheric contamination. It can destroy whatever it is that you have found. It oxidizes, things like that. So yes, they are contained in a way that some of the early mummies from the beginning, really, of the 19th century weren't. But the range, I should just say, the range of the mummies that were tested come from very early to relatively recently. So, mummies found in the 19th century right the way up to, say, the 1960s.
Yeah, so all these mummies with the cocaine laced traces weren't all found in the same spot at the same time. These were different locations at different periods.
Yes.
Of discovery. Okay.
And again, with that gives you a very good sample. Again, it just sort of adds to the real question. And one of the things that we've been very clear to do in the book is not to say we have the answers, but to say that here are some points. Can we question them? Now, toxicologists, Egyptian historians have this problem. It is there are two schools of thought. It must have come from the Americas, and you have what we call an isolationist group of people who believe that Egypt never explored that far. They're desperately looking for some other excuse, and unfortunately, contamination's just not cutting it. Given the temporal range, given the different locations, you would, that or how can I put it? Archaeologists and curators in museum could perhaps do with going to Narcotics Anonymous, because there seems to be a major drug in there.
There's another problem going on.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about this because we have a lot more that we can talk about, and I just don't want to miss this. So in the book, you mention Honduras and how the country of Honduras officially denied ship excavations of ancient Roman artifacts because they were believed to be pre-Columbus. What happened there? Why did they say you can't excavate these shipwrecks?
Well, it's not just Honduras. I mean, there's several Roman shipwrecks have been located around the Americas. I mean, Rio would probably be my favorite site to discuss, but for the same reasons as with Honduras. The major problem that we've got in this particular topic is academics. This isn't let's just criticize academics, purist. This puritanical academia. I have an exceptional problem with, because when you say, well, there's Roman amphorae that's been found, just outside what's called the Bay of Jars, actually, in just outside the port of Rio in Brazil, just as with Honduras, by the way. When you say, oh, well, it's amphorae and actually Roman wrecks, that's when you end up with the academic police coming in and really getting very personal, nitpicking, and if they can't find something academically to have a pop at you with, they'll find something personal, things like this. Because it interrupts the narrative that their jobs depend upon. I'm a lecturer. If I went into my class and said, "Listen, everyone, everything that I've been teaching you the past few years, just scrap it. Let's start. Let me tell you the real truth in all of this." Well, I have that choice, but I also have a choice to pay for my electric the following month and to keep my fridge full.
True. So does that mean there's secret agreement behind the scenes? Do they have these conversations around the bar, or is it just?
I think realistically, what we're dealing with is, if that's some academics, when you've got governments which have foundation stories, so you have Cabral, founded this country. You've got, oh, well, Columbus, he enabled the, Spanish country. It interrupts a narrative. And I mean, just give you an example of this.
Sure.
So, Robert Marx, no relation to Karl, by the way, I believe, but Robert Marx was a marine archaeologist. Known for finding some things. Some have called him a treasure hunter, but I think that's just more of a slur. A marine archaeologist, and he'd heard some rumors, I think from 1976, by a fisherman He'd said, actually, there's a load of strange jars. We keep getting these shards of pottery coming up when we're fishing. And, here's some examples of them. And Marx understood that, these look like what are called amphorae. Now, amphorae is sort of containers, that Roman containers that would have red wine, olive oil, liquids in them. And are very distinctly from the Mediterranean, the classical Mediterranean world. So he went digging underwater, and lo and behold, found amphorae, hundreds of shards of pottery, plus perhaps even some decking from a Roman vessel. And of course, when you discover something like this, what do? Well, you go and report it. And of course, that's when he reports it to the Brazilian government of the day, who promptly revoke any further digging licenses that were given and promptly ask him to leave the country. When he returns to Brazil a few years later, he finds that the site is covered with silt and mud from a trawler. Now, the Brazilian government denies that they issued that, but he spoke to a number of people who said it was actually, we were paid by the government.
Yeah, so that's not just denying someone to go. That's going the extra mile to prevent any discovery by anyone else and to hide these potential artifacts. So when we were talking earlier about cocaine residue, or the finding corn, one can sure make the argument that there was cross contamination, but in my understanding, I think in Peru or Chile, there were pottery shards, right?
Yeah,
that had painted or in a style of Chinese pottery. Is that correct, or Polynesian?
Polynesian for sure. Now, one of the bits of evidence just away from the pottery with the Polynesians is also through DNA, which, how can we argue? So
well, I guess you could say there was No, you can't cross-contaminate that way. Never mind. Okay.
You could. Yeah. That'd be one of those fun Egyptian pharaoh parties.
Right. Yeah. But I mean, there's only one way to cross, genetic lines, and we all know how that happens. So, okay. And now that scientists have seen that the genetics have shown that there is Polynesian genes in some of these. Are we talking about people that are alive today, or are we talking about dummy mummies that have been excavated?
Oh, well,
or great, people from grave sites bodies.
I mean, we'll come to the Chinese in just one second.
Sure,
I was having a coffee, actually in London, of all places, with a sort of mutual friend. One of those we'd sort of met up, and then everyone left, and we just carried on talking. And he was a sailor, and I just made a flippant remark about the Polynesians. I mean, the vast distances in the Pacific. I said, and where are all of your charts? And he says, oh, we don't have charts. We sing our way. That's how we do it. We know the song to get from islands, and that was fascinating. In terms of the DNA evidence, what we're really talking about here is a DNA study. Now, this was peer-reviewed. It's established in Nature, and the journal Nature, I should say. And it comes from the inhabitants of Easter Island. So you got the Rapa Nui and all of this. And what was really interesting about the results is that the DNA concluded that they had ancestors from around 1150 AD that were from the Atlantic shore of what we would call today Colombia. So you know, we're talking Atlantic side from a Pacific island. I mean,
So the Pacific Islanders had that Atlantic DNA.
yes.
That's very interesting. Yeah, I mean, again, it's one of those things where it's like, humans can do amazing things. Sometimes we discover things by accident, and it's like, oh wow, look what we can do. And I don't find it very, hard to believe that Polynesians had made it to to South America, especially since they made it to other islands that are really, I mean, they're tens of thousands of miles of traversing islands. They were a seafaring culture that, if anyone could have crossed the Pacific, it would have been them. But then, so where's the Chinese play into that?
Just another thing, just on that, you just reminded me about sweet potatoes were found on Easter Island, 1200 AD. Sweet potatoes are, of course, a crop from the Americas. So again, on top of all of that, if we can arrest people and incarcerate people based on DNA evidence, why on earth do we shrug our shoulders and say, oh, well, no? That it can't be the case that the Polynesians. Now, in terms of the Chinese, well, we've got some fascinating notions. So there's reference to a place called, now please excuse me in my pronunciation, but there's a place that's referred to as Fusan, which is sort of like the Vinland, if you will. We'll come on to that in a bit, maybe, of the western side, or the western seaboard of the United States. Essentially, there's a description and actually a map, allegedly. There might be some controversy with the map, but there's certainly some written accounts from 100 BC that suggest that there was they referred to it as an exceptionally large island, and it sort of marries with the description of what we would find in the west of the United States and the western provinces of Canada. You've also got some very Asian or Far Eastern Asian looking statues that have been found, or heads, I should say, that have been found within Central America. Again, if we come back to the Egyptians, the Olmec heads, we have some very distinctly Nubian and Black African features that are found on carvings. These great Olmec heads that, were from what, I think 1000 BC off the top of my head.
Well, I've heard an argument against that, saying that that's just like an Anglican interpretation of these, and that just because they have bigger lips or wider nose doesn't mean that they're necessarily African. That the people that lived there had fuller lips than typical North European aesthetic and that sort of thing. Do you think that's what it is? Do you think that there's a
I'm open to the argument. Like I say, I'm here to question. I'm not here to educate. I'm here to provoke and to provoke people into thought. Of course, that's possible. But when you speak to what's left of the native inhabitants from that area who refer to the white man landing, the black man, these places, these depictions, jewelry that's clearly Egyptian, that has been found. If the local traditions suggest that people sailed in these very unusual looking, what we call today boats, but these floating islands, then it's up for question. I just think it's like it's like this. If I want to look at your family history, for example, so if I undertake do look at family trees for people, genealogy, the first place I go isn't to the historical archives. The first place I go is to you. because you're probably going to know a hell of a lot more about your own history than a textbook which has names and dates on it. Well, that applies equally to the different cultures. And if they say, well, actually, we were visited back then, why on earth do we dismiss that as some fantasy or religious legend? And yet it's usually the same people who then say, oh, no, these heads can't be that. Well, okay, fine. But, what do the people who've grown up with them say?
Yeah. Well, the Olmec had in the book you discuss a bronze axe as well that was apparently identical to an axe in Egypt, in ancient Egypt. Was it identical, or was it just similar? Like how do they look at these? Yeah,
it's almost identical. I mean, you can say it's similar, but again, we come back to the problems that we've got with the Clovis point, which is essentially an arrowhead. How it was that developed independently in the United States, apparently, or the place that we call the United States today. After it had began to be developed in Western France, we do have a big problem with that, because that's a form of technology that was, for example, why did the Aboriginal Australians not come up with it at the same time? So yes, if we move on to that point, yeah, it is almost identical. It really is again a metallurgical technique that is the chances of someone coming up with creating bronze points, things like this, in the exact same tradition and style, same mixture, metallurgical compounds, etc. It just becomes a little bit hard to accept, but we can't rule it out. Can't be ruled out.
But what do you believe?
My personal views are that with Central America, I would be open to more question whether, for me, and this is where the two people writing something. For me, I think when we're looking at Central America, we probably have a stronger argument with cocaine, tobacco, and the DNA than perhaps looking at artistic renditions. With art, people can see so many things individually. Perhaps that's my view, but it's there in the mix because it has to be in the mix.
Now you are working on a book about the Knights Templar. In this book, Uncharted, it is stated that you think that there's not enough evidence to really support the legend of the Templars, coming over to North America. Probably much to the chagrin of many fans of Curse of Oak Island. But do you think that there is a chance that they could have come to North America?
I no, in short,
Really?
but their descendants and the traditions, absolutely. I'll just qualify. So when the Norse are coming over to their island hopping from Britain to the Faroe Islands, to Iceland, to Greenland, and then to Newfoundland as a minimum. In a variety of sagas, the Farienga saga, for example, the saga of Eric Reinauda, Eric the Red, Leif Erikson, etc. There are references to a few places. So Vinland, Markland, and Helleland. Vinland, the fertile place. Helleland, the hellish place, really. Nothing grows there. And Markland, the place of woods. The Norse get to Newfoundland. There's a UNESCO site, Lancer Meadow, which is roughly Jellyfish Cove for me and you. They get there around about 1000 AD. And Vinland is suspected The site, I should say, at Newfoundland, Outlands Meadow, is a sort of ship repair facility. Vinland is probably in New England. Now, the Norse were settling not just in the Americas, but they settled in Sicily. They established, well, through the Kievan Rus, they established Moscow. Today is Ukraine, Russia. They established Iceland, Greenland. The Norse were absolutely everywhere. And ultimately, they settled permanently in today's Normandy, literally the Norseman area. And the Normans, as we know, invaded England in 1066. And yes, they ended up really taking over England, and then bits of Scotland, a key bit that's missed. And these Normans, for example, a family that you will be familiar with, the Sinclairs from Santa Clara, end up as Norman rulers, ended up being the Earls of Orkney and Caithness. They were from Norse extraction anyway, but married into Norse royalty. What that says is they most likely had access to maps confirming where Vinland was. And in the book, we talk about the so-called Xeno voyages. Now, the Sinclair family is large, and certainly was at that point, quite large. There were members of the Sinclair family who were Templars. There are also two prominent Sinclair family members who testified against the Templars in Scotland in 1307. This is like any family mixed, but certainly their traditions, the Templar traditions could very well have travelled with Henry Sinclair. I don't know why we call him Prince Henry, but Henry Sinclair, who allegedly went on a voyage with the brothers Zeno, sort of Italian traders, if you will. And I suspect that they were going to try to find, as the Pope was curious about this, what had happened to the colony at Greenland. It had about 3,000 people on it, the eastern, middle, and western settlement. And about 1350, the Earth goes through a period of glaciation called the Little Ice Age, lasts until the Industrial Revolution. Where did the colonists go? Only a handful came back to Europe. Where did the rest of them go? That might explain why you end up with the controversial Newport Tower. You end up with the Westford Knight. You end up with lots of different rune stones off the coast of New England, maybe even the Kensington runestone, sort of depicting this search to try and find where the missing people had gone.
How'd the search go?
Well, if you read the Kensington runestone, not very well. It seems that a lot of people died on a detachment. And the Westford Knight rubbings, I should say, I've seen plenty of rubbings, have a shield on it, that of Clan Gun. So it's quite possible that Clan Gun either established the Newport Tower or settled there. Ultimately, what happened to the voyage? Well, Henry Sinclair returns to Orkney, and he's then killed. Well, I think he's captured and killed by the English in the end. So, sorry about that, everyone.
Yeah. All right. So look, we have just a little bit of time left, and I want to read this quote that I thought was great that you included in the book. It's from Herbert Spencer. Quote, "There is a principle which is a barrier against all information, which is proof against all arguments, and which cannot fail to keep a man in everlasting ignorance. That principle is contempt prior to investigation." Now, I see the sign behind you that says, "I want to believe." And so I have to ask you, do you think that extraterrestrials are visiting this planet?
I think that Certainly, I don't think people are getting beamed up every day. But
So just part-time beaming.
well, yeah, sort of, minimum wage, poor working conditions, beaming kind of stuff.
Gotcha. Yep.
I think that firstly, the solar system, probably the Earth cloud, is filled with warning signs. Don't enter dangerous species in there. For me, I think yes. This is just personally. This isn't obviously professionally, but personally, I can't see why they wouldn't. I just don't think they would interfere. Well, I could be wrong. There's two schools of thoughts. You have traversed space and time with this supreme technology to come to this odd, unusual planet that has life also to play politics. That's really depressing universe if we think, well, aliens are behind governments and what have you. If it is, I mean, I don't want a universe full of politicians, thank you. But
I like that perspective. Yeah.
Equally, if I was, worried about the fragility of life, we know that, we've been sending messages out to space for nearly 100 years, and we've not officially, at least, had a reply. I think there probably has been replies, and I think governments most certainly have kept that very quiet. In Britain, Winston Churchill, we coined the phrase "foo fighters." It was pretty openly discussed. In the United States, it was sort of kept down. And I think for the same reason that Brazil kicked Robert Marx out, interrupted the founding story and all of this, and we can't have these pagan Romans in our Catholic country, for example. I think similar rationale is the reason why things are buried. I wouldn't be surprised. Oh no, we're the only people, we're supreme, we can't have these other beings here. I wouldn't be too surprised if there was research stations on the moon observing us. If life is so precious, we're not doing a very good job as custodians of this planet. I don't think I think everyone's beginning to notice.
Yeah, I'm a little worried out where this road is going to lead. Everyone, jumping to get to the moon and Mars. It just seems like the same old behavior is going to follow us into space, and I just don't know. I don't know how we're going to make it if we can't get past that. We really need like in Star Trek, neutral zones, and like truly uphold to them. That's the only way it's going to happen. Otherwise, someone's going to have, because everything's always justified by national security. Well, if we don't do it first, then someone else is going to do it, and then we're going to be in trouble, right? So it's fear-based.
Let me be really clear about the exploration of the solar system, the great final frontier, and our quest for knowledge defines us as a human being. But I would prefer people like you, Alan, to be the first colonists on Mars rather than Elon Musk. I would prefer other people who have a genuine quest to further our species than people who want to do it so they can sell a ticket.
Yeah. Everyone listening to this podcast, I would love to see them take to the planet. Yeah, because you're right. There's it's funny, people who are interested in the paranormal and ufology and spirituality and the unknown, for the most part, are really just good-natured, curious people, but then even in those fields, you see a flare-up of ego and that sort of thing. It happens, and that's why I say I am concerned about the future of space exploration and see where that goes. But just like a democracy, it's not perfect, and we developed it for a reason to kind of help, hopefully, keep ourselves in check. It's very difficult the larger society gets, because I really think fundamentally we evolved as in smaller tribes, and it's so much easier to self-regulate and have your own shared belief system and rules and regulations to abide by when you're a smaller tribe. It's easy to support each other as well. So this is only going to get more challenging as the human race expands bigger and bigger and bigger. But I remain hopeful. How about you?
I think that what you've just said isn't something to be feared, but actually how exciting. Because it sounds to me as if our species has something left to strive for. And if that is the exploration of space, and it wouldn't surprise me if intelligent life, should it exist, would speak to governments rather than worry people. But I would much rather us explore space rather than conquer it.
Yeah. All right, James, if you can leave us with one thought, it could be about whatever you want. The book Uncharted, A Rediscovered History of Voyages to the Americas Before Columbus, or anything else.
Well, I suppose final thought, Jerry Springer style. Yeah, if you're interested in pre-Columbian exploration, the book is there quite simply to open up some questions. It's not that everything that's written in there is 100% accurate. The future might prove me wrong. Listen, it goes like this. In my final thoughts are like this, just reflecting what you've just said. Remember, everyone, that there's more that unites us than divides us, and if you keep that within you each day, we can change. Because for me, the world feels like a very fearful place, and yet people give me so much hope each day.
Isn't that funny? Yeah.
Just keep on going, everyone.
Yeah, it's true. I love that. Thank you so much for that, James. All right, and if you want to find out more about the book and James, go to newrennies.org. That's NEWRENNIES. And yeah, check out his work and keep an eye out for his upcoming Templar book as well. Thank you so much, James. And for everybody listening out there, as usual, you can always recatch this rebroadcast on the UNX network. Special thanks to Race Hobb, Program Director at the UNX, and Margie K. Until next time, everyone, peace and love, and live in the mystery.